Welcome to the World Over Live. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We join you tonight from Anaheim, California. This was the site of the 130th Supreme Convention of the Knights of Columbus. While here, we interviewed a number of dignitaries in the church, including Supreme Knight Carl Anderson. We open with our interview with Mr. Anderson. He spoke about his annual report, religious liberty, and a few other matters on the minds of Catholics. Take a listen. Let's talk for a moment about a new campaign you all just rolled out. Now, marriage is under attack here in the United States. Religious liberty, as you mentioned in your speech, is also under attack. Does the United States really need a civility campaign at this moment, Carl?
Well, I think the short answer is yes, because so many of these issues, they become so emotional, at least for certain people. But in general, for the past few election cycles, people have become more and more frustrated. Now 8 in 10 Americans are saying they're very frustrated with the tone of political campaigns. And 2/3 think it's bad for the country, and 3/4 think it's getting worse. So yes, I think we do, so that we provide a context in which we can have a discussion on the issues and not be simply attacking people by personalities.
Your Marist poll, which you quoted, 74% of people think that there's a more negative tone to the politics of today. 66% think that people are simply attacking their opponents. But the fact is, you worked in the Reagan White House. These negative campaigns seem to work. Whether it's the swift voting of John Kerry or the last campaign with John McCain, negative campaigns seem to work. Why do people respond yet say they're upset with these campaigns?
Well, maybe they've worked in part in the past, but I'd make a distinction between negative and civility, because I think if somebody is clouding their record, obfuscating their record, they're misrepresenting things. I think to point that out clearly with a tone of civility is doing the voters a service. So not every negative necessarily bad, but it's the tone and it's the way we conduct the discussion.
Now, how you are encouraging people to sign a petition. Tell us about that and how that will tangibly, do you think, change this hostile, negative political approach?
Well, I think the important part is, first of all, to give people a voice. There's something they can do, sign this petition for civility. And secondly, it gives us something to talk about and advertise about in terms of some of the newspaper ads we're doing and some other things. So it's a way of generating and letting people know, look, it's not just you and I. It's 8 out of 10 Americans want to change here. So listen. Let's do something about it.
You said in your speech that Catholics can raise the level of our national discourse. How? Obviously, this campaign is part of sensitizing them, I think, to that. But how can they raise the level of discourse? Do they even... Here's a question. When you look at these polls, when you look at the way Catholics have voted over the last few cycles, it doesn't seem they even are absolutely sure what the Church teaches, much less raising the national discourse.
Well, now, excellent point, okay, because it depends what the pollsters, who they're asking. If they're just self-identifying Catholics, you find that there are a large segment of the Catholic population.
Culturally Catholic.
Well, they no longer go to church. They no longer really believe in what the church teaches. That's why they don't go to church. And not surprisingly, they don't support church teaching, especially when the church teaching may be a little difficult. So you find there are a lot of, quote, Catholics, unquote, that have the same views on these issues as, say, very liberal Jews or secularists who have no faith. So you combine those with the mass attending, believing Catholics who take seriously what their church teaches, and it has a way of maybe balancing them out. But if you stick to Catholics who are believers, very strong.
As I read more into this and looked at some of the polling data, haven't we always had an uncivil political debate, whether it's Alexander Hamilton talking about Thomas Jefferson or the other way around? These guys these are our founding fathers. They were pretty personal, brutal, and they would put everything out there in the public domain to push and advance their agenda and their party. Isn't that the American way in some ways, politically speaking?
Well, they even had duels, and I think Hamilton...
Lost, unfortunately.
Lost, yeah, unfortunately. But look, no, the campaigns, there can be a rough and tumble. But I think what's happening, I think what the American people are sensing, is it's becoming the norm. It's not becoming the exception. And I think what's even worse is in the polling that we found, younger Americans are reflecting that. They don't see this as much of a problem because it's all they've known over the last couple election cycles. I mean, I used to work in the Reagan White House. The famous line of President Reagan to Tip O'Neill, the Democrat Speaker of the House, "It's after 6 o'clock now, Tip, come on down. We're no longer enemies. We can have a drink together."
Right.
I don't think you see too many politicians in Washington on either side of the aisle getting together socially because they can deal with each other as friends. I think what happened in the past was, look, we understand always going to be Democrats, always going to be Republicans, so let's try to solve a problem by some kind of compromise. Now it's more like, let's destroy this
the
party,
other person,
let's destroy that candidate, and then we get everything we want. Well, democracies, that's not the way they should work.
Is that a function, do you think, of the raising, if you will, of the stakes, particularly on these deeply held issues, whether it's marriage, the life of the unborn, religious liberty, the ability to pray, put a monument up? These issues have now entered the political sphere, and they are so hotly charged, and they're so personal and run so deep that people feel their very being is under attack in the political sphere that perhaps in the age of Tip O'Neill and Reagan was not the case.
Well, there's something to be said for that. Of course, the pro-life issue, which has always been very emotional, deeply felt, was back with Reagan even before Reagan as president. I think part of it is almost the totalitarian kind of sensibility that refuses to allow an alternative. See, what's happened in the debate about religious liberty is not enough that you disagree with the Catholic Church. Let's marginalize the Church's ability to speak. Let's force the Church to follow what we say has to be done. And so it's a different kind of mentality taking hold, and I think that's very, very problematic for a democracy.
You made the case in a great speech before the Catholic Press Association earlier this year. You said, Catholics must stop picking and choosing which parts of Catholic social teaching we will accept. Explain that to people, because the fact is, whatever the politics of the moment is, Catholics are partially responsible for creating that moment and the political landscape we see before us.
Well, I think every Christian, but certainly Catholics, ought to be judging politics by the Bible and not the Bible by politics, right? And so we should be looking at party platforms, candidates' positions, in terms of Catholic social teaching. And you hardly ever see a candidate or a politician saying, you know, I have to reconsider this because the teaching of my faith tells me morally we should be going in a different direction, right? Now, there's some issues which are prudential issues. How much you put in a budget, how much you take out of a budget. But there are other issues that are not prudential like this. They're intrinsic evils. They're always evil. Doesn't matter what your intention is, the act itself. The actor may not be a sinner, depending upon his intentionality, but the act is intrinsically evil. Abortion is that, right? Destroying marriage is that. Destroying the ability of the church to have the freedom to carry on its mission, I think, is intrinsically evil. And so then the question becomes, can you really support, can you vote for somebody who's promoting intrinsic evil? One of the things I was saying to the Knights of Columbus convention here, we take great pride in our investment philosophy. So there are many companies we refuse to invest in because they profit from intrinsically evil products, right? They produce abortifacients, or they're in the pornography business. We won't buy any of that. So if I won't support a company who's profiting from intrinsically evil products, Why should I vote for a candidate who's promoting intrinsically evil policies?
Now, there was an idea raised from the floor of this convention by Cardinal Timothy Dolan. Roll that tape.
Anderson for president.
Your reaction?
Well, you could say I think what he meant was president of the Knights of Columbus.
I don't think so. I think he was talking a little broader.
Well, look, I think what the Cardinal is suggesting is that we ought to have Catholics in public office that try to take seriously the broad teaching of the Church. Look, your test of being faithful isn't when you agree, right? The test of being faithful is when you have doubts or you may disagree. That's when your faith is tested. So to get up time after time after time and say, no, I disagree with my church's teaching. And now we even have politicians who are saying, well, I question the motivation of the church.
Who is the church to even make that statement?
Right. And we know what kind of issues we're talking about here, that the church's position is discriminatory or rises out of prejudice. Now you're attacking the people. You're attacking the bishops, not for their views, but for them, attacking the Holy Father.
And this really ties into this whole religious liberty, religious freedom argument that has been going on for so long now and that we're still in the middle of. The Knights have a long history of protecting religious expression and that First Amendment right, whether it's fighting the Klan back in the 20s or fast-forwarding to defending monuments in certain areas, commemorating our war dead, putting God in the Pledge of Allegiance. Where do you see this battle now?
Well, I think it's fundamental, because really what's at stake is the right of conscience of every American to act. Look, sure, you can guarantee religious freedom if by that you mean worship or prayer. You know, you can go in your closet and pray.
Right.
But that's not what our founding fathers had in mind. They wanted a country that was open and free so people could express and exercise their religious faith in a way that benefited the society. We have to remember, our great country is a product of millions and millions and millions of people of faith whose faith inspired their actions. And you look at the history of the Catholic Church. I mean, we built schools, we built hospitals, we built orphanages. Why? All of that was an expression of our religious freedom and our religious belief to help our brothers and sisters, right? That's what Christians are called to do. Now the government says, well, you can only do that if it's according to what we say we want done, okay? So you're going to do health care? Well, you got to provide all these services too, or get out of the health care. You want to be a doctor? You want to do abortion? Go be a truck driver. You can't be a doctor anymore. See, it's a removal of people of faith if they happen to disagree with the current, I'll say, fad of the government. And the First Amendment was designed to protect us from that.
Listening to your address here to the Knights, I mean, this is remarkable, and I've been speaking throughout our coverage. The work of the Knights goes really uncovered so often, particularly the local chapters. They're helping the disabled, they're rebuilding homes, they're building ramps, they're doing all of these activities on the local level. They rarely get covered. The other part of this story that's rarely covered is your membership is up, your donations are huge. How, in the midst of an economic downturn, are you seeing this sort of not only civic involvement from your members, but also the ability to still engage in great philanthropic work?
Well, I think we have many, many men who take the principles seriously. Charity, unity, fraternity. And it's the unity that links to charity. So that the more you get involved in works of charity, and nothing wrong with writing checks, but I'm not talking about writing checks. I'm talking about picking up a crippled child, putting her in a wheelchair, and seeing the look on her face. You have that experience, you want to continue to do that. You help a Haitian child who's an earthquake victim. I mean, when I was in Haiti, I met a young woman who lost legs, and every member of her family was killed. and yet she was deeply spiritual, thanked God for us giving her a wheelchair. Now you imagine what her life is going to be like in a place like Haiti with no family members and missing a leg, right? So her faith, her way of being, and if anybody had a reason to be down in the dumps, right? But she wasn't. I mean, it's inspiring. And when you do more of that, you see that there's an exchange between people who give material gifts and people who give spiritual gifts.
Mm-hmm. Final question. There is some reportage out there about the Al Smith dinner, which has always been the great platform for the presidential candidates each year. President Obama has apparently been invited. Your thoughts on that? Is that appropriate to platform a candidate who is in such opposition to church teaching in such a public way?
Great question. I don't want Cardinal Dolan to take back his endorsement of me for presidents, but I think, you know, if you look at Al Smith, there are a lot of people at the time Al Smith ran for president who didn't want to give him a platform, burn crosses as he went in to give speeches, things like that. So I think there's certain established forum that don't necessarily imply an endorsement. And so might be interesting to see what he has to say.
Yeah.
I think we have to be, as we should be for all candidates, critical analysis.
Great.
And being very attentive to who's speaking accurately and who isn't.
What is the next big agenda item on the Knights' agenda? Where do you want to take this organization in the next year?
Well, I think, following up with what we've been talking about, I think we're making a very strong case that you help build the country together, knit the country together in a solidarity based on charity. And I would hope all Catholics would try to do just a little more to charity because it lays a great foundation for the country. Secondly, we got to raise civility. And then I would say, thirdly, I mean, we really have to get serious about Catholic social teaching. And we have to say to people, you know what? If you disregard the Church's teaching on these public issues, then, you know, don't expect our support. Don't expect our support as Catholics. If enough Catholics said that, we could transform politics, because then the parties and the candidates would have to come to us, right? They'd have to come to us.
And that really ties into your great efforts to catechize, as the Pope mentioned in his address, speech to you all, or letter rather, to the Knights, that it's so important, and he was commending your work, of educating Catholics as to the Church teaching, because so many people simply don't know what the Church teaches or requires.
And I think the other big issue is, what does it mean to have a Catholic conscience, right? It's not just, I get to pick and choose whatever I want, it's my conscience, therefore I'm okay, right? You have the responsibility to have an educated, formed conscience. So if you're a politician who's for abortion, you tell me, you've read Evangelium Vitae? You've read what the Second Vatican Council has to say about abortion? You've listened to Mother Teresa talk about abortion, and now you tell me you disagree. How is that, really? How is that, really? See, so we have to take that, we have to confront civilly, but we have to ask them, you know, okay, so you're for abortion. You mean the 100+ pages of Evangelium Vitae doesn't convince you. Exactly why?